Now, more local talk you can trust. It's time for Speaking Freely with Josh Eckel, Alex Shaw, and Sherry Voluntary.
Trump's policies are racially discriminatory. I could see you making an argument like that.
Guaranteed China will strike before we do. I think so.
When did our responsibility become everybody else's?
A unique look at current local, statewide, and national events. No boundaries, no sacred cows.
These people have to wake up, and you guys are doing it.
Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you.
This is Speaking Freely on Talk Radio 92.3 and AM 760.
6:30. Hey, Knoxville. You are listening to Speaking Freely on Knoxville Talk Radio 92.3 FM and AM 760. Broadcasting from the FMT Insurance Studio. Always taking your calls on the Pure Magic hotline at 865-888-TALK. That's 865-888-8255. And if you want to get in on the conversation, you can catch the show on our live stream on Facebook at the Speaking Freely page.
I'm paying attention, boss.
Yeah, good. I am your host, Sherry Voluntary, the Mistress of Liberty.
All right, then.
And with me, as always, is Mr. Justin Cornett, the man with the golden voice over there.
Golden voice. Golden.
Your voice was meant for the radio, Justin.
Yeah, and so is my face.
We won't get into that. And a special guest with us tonight is Mr. Michael Clark.
Good evening.
Our sponsor, the editor-in-chief at our sponsor, Recuro. So, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you.
Thank you.
So, how you guys been?
Recovering from the cold.
Yeah, I enjoy 2 nights off.
Yeah, I did. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
It was kind of nice. It was like a little
nice.
mini vacation.
Yeah, it was nice. I don't know. I've really been like being below 15 degrees has been killing me.
It'll suck your soul away.
Yeah.
It freezes it in place, I think is what it does.
Yeah, I think the 30s I'm okay with, but man, this morning it was like 9.
Oh, I thought you were going to say now that you're in your 40s. Sorry.
Thanks for reminding me. I love being in my 40s, but
I like being the youngest one in the room. That
not
never
by
happens.
much, though.
Doesn't matter. Whatever works.
At least I look like the youngest. That's okay.
That's true.
We'll give you that.
I found a gray eyebrow hair the other day, and I thought I was going to cry.
I've had the same experience, honestly. Only I've got a lot more gray than.
Yeah, but I refuse to die. I don't want to end up looking like a Cheeto because I'll get impatient with it too.
Die as in D-Y-E, not D-I-E.
Right. Yeah,
you don't have a lot of choice over that one.
Yeah, no, I'm not trying to euthanize myself.
You're not going to get out the Just for Men.
No,
not
a chance.
Yeah.
I've got the perfect mix of experience and vigor right now.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. I like the salt and pepper thing. I like it a lot. You've got the salt and pepper thing, Mike.
I have a lot of salt and a lot of pepper.
And that beautiful beard you got going on there. That's a real man's beard.
It is pretty attractive.
Look at that, Facebook people.
When you can Velcro shoes to your beard, you know it's real.
There you go. Yeah. He's got like the hillbilly beard going, sort of.
Yeah.
Almost. Like if
he should be a moonshiner or something.
Hey.
Yeah, I agree.
Practice.
Yeah.
What do you think is in my cup? No, just
yeah.
That is coffee. Just coffee.
Well, one of the things with the weather, I do have to say, is I've never seen this before. And I don't know that it's never been this cold before in here since I've lived here in 15 years, but never for so many days in a row that the pond behind my house is frozen so solid that kids are sliding across the ice. And I was like, are they going to fall in? They had like a hammer too, or a hatchet, something like hitting the ice to go through.
Yeah, they've obviously never seen It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah. Or, they don't have that sense of danger that you do develop as you get older. Because I was like, oh, my God. But my son was like, it's been below freezing for several days now. I'm sure they're okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay.
There was a time when parts of Fort Loudon Lake froze over and they were driving cars on it.
Wow.
Yeah, I've heard the stories from when I was little because it's cold and it doesn't get that way here very often. So when you can drive a car on a lake, why wouldn't you?
That's some logic for you.
This is Tennessee, okay?
Yeah.
This isn't Canada.
Or Michigan.
Or the UP.
Yeah, I used to.
The Upers.
Yeah, Upers. Love the Upers.
Say yeah to the UPA.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Is that like 3 letters? UPA?
No.
Oh.
The UPA.
2 letters, 1 word.
They say A up there like Canadians because they were so isolated from everywhere for so long that they only got like a radio station from Canada. And
do they also cook ham as a replacement for bacon?
Not that I'm aware.
Okay, just curious.
In 2 years, I didn't see that, but not that I'm aware. They could. There's
I was
lots
just
of
making sure they weren't
Finnish people
fascists.
there. Yeah. Fascists. Those dang Canadians and their bacon fascism.
Healthy Canadian bacon, whatever. Fat-free, who cares, okay? This is
Fat-free.
America. I don't know. It's close. It's one of the, ham's
It's like
97%.
ham. I was going to say it's just
ham is
ham.
97% fat-free,
Wow. I didn't know that.
generally
I
speaking.
guess I should, but I didn't.
Pay attention.
Well, it makes sense. It's not even half as good as bacon.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. That's got that big, long, white stripe of fat running through it.
That's the best.
That's 50% fat.
I like it. And those people that are disgusting and eat like flimsy bacon. My brother loves bacon like undercooked. It's so gross.
Yeah,
It's just
it can be too
disgusting.
undercooked, but I'm not really one that's going to be like, oh,
slimy.
no, it's bacon. I don't want that.
It has to be crispy for me to eat it. I'm not
Would you
eating
like that with or without botulism?
Yeah, it's gross.
Well, without botulism, but it doesn't have to be crispy to get past the botulism, so I don't really care.
I like it crispy. Anyways, the weather is nice.
Now that we're talking about bacon, let's move on to something people
else
care about.
that people like
Wait,
to
do
fry
I have
up.
to?
Wait a minute, people actually do care about bacon quite
People
a
like to fry up other people, apparently.
bit. That happens.
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys, I know you heard about it because we've talked about it, that Tennessee is set to restart death row executions. So what happened was about 10 years ago, there was a lawsuit brought by some inmates about the cruelty, I guess is what they were under, that was the premise that they were using for their lawsuit, and saying that they didn't have the right drugs to perform lethal injection properly and humanely. But the Tennessee, as of January 2017, there were 63 inmates on death row in Tennessee, and that the executions have been on hold for that challenge. But now they are set to reinstate. The Supreme Court of Tennessee and the Department of Corrections confirmed the executions will start again in May. So there are, I guess, 3 people that are scheduled right now to go to be executed. And I think they're going to do lethal injection, although
That's what I saw.
we do still have the electric chair.
It's a
in
backup plan.
2009 or 2007 was the last time it was used. I think it was 2007.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yes, in 2007. And I don't know, this issue it's one that I don't like.
Yeah, I don't like it either. I mean, on the
Yeah.
one hand, I don't care that bad people die,
Right.
and I don't even particularly care if they die in a not nice way, but
Well.
I really don't like leaving people's deaths in the hands of the state. That's
Yeah.
just...
See, I tend to agree. I'm more of a John Locke type person on this. If you show yourself to be a wild beast amongst a civilized society, then the civilized society has a right to remove you from it. But I do think that the caveat, the caveat should be that the family of the victim can say no death penalty.
Yeah,
If the family can come in, because who's been
Right,
wronged?
that's the
Who's
person that's been wronged,
right.
for sure.
So the ultimate decision making should be there. So if the government wanted to afford the ability of the family to seek that kind of retribution, I'm very okay with it. And if the person doesn't want to seek that kind of retribution, that's absolutely fine too. That's in their wheelhouse. But
I
can't
agree
see
with,
keeping Charles Manson alive for 40, 50 years on
I think
taxpayer dime.
that outlook is reasonable. I have a hard time with a state that has the monopoly on law, and they have the monopoly on the enforcement of law, and then we put people through the system. And often, I mean, we've seen in the recent past many people exonerated with DNA testing, things like that. And so you are putting people who may or may not be guilty at times when there's this. I just think it's
one
like,
of the problems is that the incentives of prosecutors is
Yes.
not pure. It's not pure.
Right.
And we've done stories on that on this show where, you know, they've got to get somebody for it. And they need to do that. So sometimes they know that there is evidence that leads away from that, but they won't include it.
Right. That is true. That is a real problem. But, you know, legally you would argue that that's what the appeals process is for. And with DNA data, that stuff's getting better and better. For instance, we did the coverage on the hair sample stuff. That's not something that's going to be typically accepted by a judge at this point, now that everybody knows that it's been tainted stuff. So there's an evolution there in how good we are at actually determining if these people were these people. So while I agree and I share your concern, because I don't think anybody should be put to death, you know, anybody innocent should be put to death. I would say save it for the most egregious offenders or egregious offenders. Give the family the right to say, nope, we don't want this person to go, or yes, we want this person to go, because they are the ones that are actually affected. And from there, make it public. Put it out there, because it's meant to be a deterrent. It's not meant to be that there's a reason that people were drawn and quartered back in the day. I don't think that it actually is a deterrent. It hasn't stopped people from doing it, even when it was enacted much more. Yeah, but just think what the government could do with a Running Man TV show.
Oh, God. See, that's death as entertainment, too, is just not something that I would be down for.
But it does bring up another good question. I mean, so if the state has the right to kill people, then the next thing you have to worry about is the state moving the field posts on what is...
What's acceptable to kill people for, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's where I get down. It's like with the state, we've got a state that's out of control in many areas. Like I said, there's a conflict of interest in having a monopoly on law and a monopoly on enforcement, and we see it acted out all the time in a lot of these cases where police officers are let go. The man, clearly, the police officer that had raped the 13-year-old girl got probation. Yep. That was clear. He did that, and he got probation. Yep. So you've got a conflict of interest going on there, and then there are all sorts of other concerns that come into that. Like, one of them is that minorities who kill white people are much more often executed for that than white people who kill white people. So, you know, there are concerns, and I don't think giving that kind of power to a state that has so many monopolies on those things is a good idea for our safety.
I'm not saying I disagree with you particularly on that, but I would assert that if you simply increase the power of the jury, the ability of the jury to actually decide the case based on its merit as opposed to letter of the law per se, and we've talked about this as well. In jury nullification, you have mandatory minimum sentences for certain things,
which are horrible.
They have to go by the letter of the law. They're instructed to go by the letter of the law, and they end up giving somebody 60 years that they don't think actually deserves 60 years, and vice versa. Though, if the prosecution thinks that they can only prove manslaughter, then that's the way that they go. But the jury should be able to say, "Wow, look, this guy."
The problem with that, though, is that so much power lies within the office of the district attorney to decide what evidence will be included and what's not.
The monopoly on investigation.
Exactly. So, I mean, I have been through this issue, actually, my family. My stepfather was accused of a crime. I mean, it was over very quickly. When I was about 12 years old, we came home and there were police at our door. They arrested him, didn't tell the charges. We had no idea what he's in there, held him for hours and hours, abused him, honestly. There was abuse there. Started accusing him of murder, and they had already, pigeonholed. Things were falling in line that they thought. This was at the very beginning stages of the investigation, and this is one of the things you'll see happens a lot when you hear people talk about these situations where there's a tunnel vision that gets... people that investigators, not intentionally, but it tends to, they start looking at somebody who looks good for
Their job is to prosecute people. So they do what they can to prosecute people.
Not to find the truth.
Not to find the actual justice.
All right, guys. Well, we got to get out of here. We'll take a little break and we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Pure Magic Magic Hotline is open for you to speak freely. 865-888-TALK. Talk Radio 92.3 and AM 760.
For the longest time, baby, I wanna be.
Welcome back. You are listening to Speaking Freely on Knoxville Talk Radio 92.3 FM and AM 760. Talk you can trust. Broadcasting from the FMT Insurance Studios and always taking your calls on the Pure Magic Hotline at 865-888-TALK. That's 865-888-8255. And this segment is sponsored by Recuro, recuro.org.
You're welcome.
And yeah, you happen to be the editor-in-chief, as we mentioned before, of
True.
Recuro.
And a stellar writer himself.
Yes, a stellar writer. And you actually had an article published in the past week. Was it this week or last week?
This week.
Beginning of this week, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was,
Monday.
I thought was really great. And since you're on, I thought it would be a good time to just talk about that article a little bit. I guess we're going to move on from the death penalty. We could talk about that. We should do a whole show just on issues relating to that, because there are a lot of, it is a big issue, and it's easy to be callous about it and say, well, these people are criminals, but they're criminals sometimes.
Let me know that, my somewhat callous sounding opinion. I recognize that it could be construed as callous, but I would also like to point out that our organization, the Libertarian Party here in East Tennessee, is a signatory on the TASME group, which is the group that Hannah Cox came on and talked about exclusions from the death penalty based on mental illness.
Yeah. And I wasn't calling you callous.
Right.
I
understand, but I don't want people to get the wrong impression of what the Libertarian Party stance is actually anti-death
penalty, right.
but it also allows freedom of thought. So I am really close to anti-death penalty, but I don't see.
I think it has to be
alive in certain instances.
Right. It's
personally.
It's a tough issue because you don't want to let evil people just free to live. Like sometimes I think, geez, I don't want anybody put to death, but I don't want people being murdered either in heinous ways. I mean, it's a tough issue, and I am on the anti-death penalty camp because I don't think that there's enough justice really in the justice system to be able to carry it out and know you're not killing innocent people. But I'm not sold to all of the merits on either side, I guess. Is it's a hard issue, but did you have something to say, Mike?
Well, I was just thinking that, the whole idea of justice is to give people what they're due. And that's not always an easy question.
It's really not.
Exactly.
It's really not, which is why I throw the caveat in there that the person that was actually encroached upon the family is the ultimate judge and jury on
I think
that.
We're in agreement in a case like, the Christian Newsom murder. I mean, those were just
how do you justify?
Really horrific, and those people, like, you lose your humanity when you do something like that. That's where I really have a hard time because
I don't know how society. I mean, you keep something like that alive, giving it chance after chance after chance after chance, and I keep saying it because I don't know what else to define it as. I mean, are you complicit as a society at that point?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's
or
tough.
should you be the don't hurt anyone kind of thing,
right?
And it's a tough call. And like I say, I don't think many people should be executed. I really don't. I think the most egregious offenders should absolutely have the opportunity to be executed with the family's input.
Yeah, it would be a lot. I think there would be a lot better an actual justice if families had more input. But we have to remember that crimes are not crimes against people; they're crimes against the state. That's how the state determines it.
That is
another problem.
We need the people involved in this because it's actually the people that supposedly make up the state that are actually being offended. So they should have more of a say in it than some bureaucrat. Period. And we should look for ways to do that. Instructions to the jury is a huge way to do that.
Yes, but as we've seen, the instructions often, even in something like nullification, jury nullification, where they will absolutely not let people know that they have the right of nullification.
Oh, yeah. There's no question that the government doesn't really care about these rights in a lot of cases.
And politicians
they want
care
to
about
prosecute.
looking tough on crime.
That's
they don't
it.
care about the truth.
That's
so
it.
It's the optics.
that's why I really, really have a problem with it.
That's why Rand Paul's getting shut down on a filibuster talking about illegal wiretaps. Everybody knows that they're spying on American people.
Right.
Everybody knows that that's wrong. And the majority of your Congress is going to vote for that crap.
Yep.
For another 6 years.
right.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
You guys voted the right guy in.
There aren't better choices, though. That's the problem. There aren't people who have their principles strong enough to stand against
Larry,
that kind
Curly,
of pressure.
or Mo would be a better example because you would have absolute gridlock, which means you wouldn't get a 6-year signing.
Which is why I'm for third parties, because I want gridlock, honestly. I want the state slowed down.
I'm for third parties because I want to see two parties compromise. I think that's why I like third parties. I think you got a wedge.
They agree to fleece us?
Yeah,
that's
do bad things.
they can all agree on what bad things they're going to do.
Just depends on what it is.
The degrees of the bad that they're going to do.
Well,
but anyways.
Two-party system's one step away from a one-party system. Three-party system is two steps away.
The two-party system we have is a one-party system.
True enough.
We already have
True
one
enough.
party. Yeah, so let's not even pretend. But moving on to Mike's article, and it was called False Alarm, False Issues, or False Alarm, False Issue. And it was dealing with the Hawaii
false alarm,
that the nuclear attack was coming and that they were upset about. I mean,
yeah, understandably.
They should be.
Yeah, I can't blame them for that. But
No,
you had a
absolutely
really interesting perspective. So at first you in the article, you talk about the warning system itself and why you don't want a bunch of fail safes and.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you just think about the human mind for a minute, whenever you're walking along a path and you see a snake, you jump back. And you don't have to think about it. You just automatically do it. Your brain turns on and it does it. But oftentimes the brain is wrong because you can, when you're trying to detect a threat, you can optimize for sensitivity or for accuracy or for speed. And if it's, for survival, it needs to be for speed. If I jump back because I thought a stick was a snake, sure, that's annoying. All right, I jumped for a bad reason, but you want to be alive, not dead.
Right.
And if you're taking extra time to determine a threat, it might cost you your life.
Right. So it's a better safe than sorry.
Right, exactly. Better safe than sorry. So when you're looking at these missile detection systems, it's the same thing. You want them to be accurate, obviously, but you also need them to be quick. So if you determine that there's missiles incoming from North Korea, well, those missiles take 20 minutes to get to Hawaii. So every second, every minute counts.
Right. So that was a good point in the first part, because people had been saying, they need better fail safes, but really you don't want to waste any minutes because they're so precious at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
But the main part of your article really focused on what the mainstream media, if you want to say that, wasn't focusing on, and that is why North Korea is a problem in the first place.
Yeah. So what happened was Saturday morning, I was taking my daughter to McDonald's, and this missile attack news story came on, and they talked about it for 3 hours long, uninterrupted, 3 hours.
And they didn't mix snomageddon into it?
No, they did not. They talked about this for 3 solid hours. And, I watched it for the first half hour, and I was kind of, I felt really bad for the Hawaiians, obviously, but the time moves on and on and on. I'm like, what, really? Can you not talk about anything else? Yeah. And then it occurred to me that the media is really good at talking about the wrong things. And so, they spent all this time talking about the missile alert, but they didn't say anything, and they typically don't say anything about why there's such a big threat from Korea to begin with. And, I mean, that's obviously a lot more worthy of discussion than the missile alarm.
Right. So that being that, we have these war games going on at their back door. I mean, you went into that a little bit about
so, I mean,
the poking that has been done.
You always have to think about the golden rule, right? So if Russia had 25,000 troops on the Mexican border and 65,000 troops in Cuba,
And ships in the Gulf.
And ships in the Gulf, you know, and jets scrambling in the air and the military helicopters. The United States government would be falling all over itself to threaten and to ramp up the military and to do all these things.
Run them out.
Right.
Exactly, run them out. But this is exactly what what the United States is doing to North Korea. So when Kim Jong-un, he's a monster, but when he says, you know, I want you people out of here, is that really that unreasonable?
Right.
But here's what I find amusing about all this missile talk. And, you know, we show videos about how well our weapons can kill people all the time.
Exactly.
All the time. We've got killer bombs, and we've seen videos of them being launched from a destroyer and going, 500-600 miles inland and hitting a box that they were aiming for. You know what I'm saying?
Into Iraq, that was a big thing. During the Iraq War.
And you remember when we invaded Iraq and we were talking about Patriot missiles back in the early 90s?
Yep.
Okay, Patriot missiles are designed to intercept incoming Scud missiles back in the day. That's what they were there for. This is 25 years ago. You know what we don't ever talk about from the federal government? THAAD missiles.
Right.
We've got 1,000 THAAD missiles that are designed to pick missiles out of the sky.
The missile defense
But
shield.
we don't talk about how effective that is, because then you don't have as much to be afraid of.
Right. Then the fear is what keeps the same people in power.
Or the fact that we have almost 10,000 nuclear weapons.
Right. Exactly. So I thought that was a great article. You can go to recuro.org and read it yourself. And we've got our break coming up, Fox News. And then coming up after that, we have Mr. Michael Boldin with the 10th Amendment Center. You don't want to miss this at 7:15.
Awesome.
So we'll be right back. Don't go away.
Now, more local talk you can trust. It's time for Speaking Freely with Josh Eckel, Alex Shaw, and Sherry Voluntary.
Trump's policies are racially discriminatory. I could see you making an argument like that.
Guaranteed China will strike before we do. I think so.
When did our responsibility become everybody else's?
A unique look at current local, statewide, and national events. No boundaries, no sacred cows.
These people have to wake up, and you guys are doing it.
Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you.
This is Speaking Freely on Talk Radio 92.3 and AM 760.
7:05. Welcome back, Knoxville. You are listening to Speaking Freely on Talk Radio 92.3 FM and AM 760. Always taking your calls on the Pure Magic Hotline at 865-888-TALK. That's 865-888-8255. And if you want to get in on the conversation, you can catch our show at the Speaking Freely show page on Facebook. And this segment is sponsored by recuro.org. Recuro is a nonpartisan news and media website created to promote liberty-minded ideas on Tennessee politics and beyond. You can check out our articles, podcasts, and videos at recuro.org. I am your host, Sherry Voluntary. And with me in the studio this evening is Mr. Justin Cornett.
Always. Just
As
keeping up on a
always.
Facebook feed. I'm paying attention, I promise.
That's good. And then also joining us is the editor-in-chief of recuro.org, and that is Mr. Michael Clark.
Hello,
Yes.
Ms. Voluntary.
And we've had quite good conversation this evening about the death penalty and North Korea and
All kinds of
getting
fun
into a few things. But coming up, we're going to have Mr. Michael Boldin, which is going to be really great. And with the 10th Amendment Center, you guys don't want to miss that. He's
I'm
doing
already
some really
melty.
great work. Yeah.
It's good news. Everything that has to do with the 10th Amendment Center is good stuff and
it
make
is
you
good.
happy.
Yeah, it's actually a way to do something, get involved and do something. But so to kick that off, I wanted to look at something that was passed here in Tennessee that is nullification, which is what we're going to be talking about a little bit with Mr. Boldin there. And Governor Haslam signed it into law in 2015. And what it is, it's basically allows doctors to prescribe any drug in the U.S. Food and Drug Administration clinical trials that's already undergone phase 1 testing. And that phase checks for the safety of the health of the volunteers. So in many states, people who are terminally ill, even if there are experimental drugs that they could try, they're already dying, they can't have access to because the federal government says you're not allowed. The FDA in all of its glory.
And wisdom.
And wisdom. Oh, yes, all the wisdom. Has decided that even if you're sick and you're willing to take that chance, that they take that power out of your hands. And it's just one more indication of the way the federal government looks at us and sees us as not able to care for ourselves. They need us to step in for them, to protect us, you know, that kind of drivel.
Yeah, because terminally ill patients need protection, right?
Exactly. They're already dying. So
makes perfect sense.
I just wanted to talk about that a little bit.
I love when Mike's here because I'm not the only one that uses sarcasm.
The masters of sarcasm there. But yeah, so this has been something that has been going on for a long time. Like, this isn't new. It's just that people are finally starting to recognize that people who are sick have the right to try. I mean, I would say anyone has the right to try those drugs regardless.
Sure.
But
it's your body. You have the right to put anything in it you want.
Yeah, especially if you're dying.
Yeah.
If you're already dying, why in the world would someone say, well, it might kill you?
Right.
Well, really? It might save me too.
I just like that the stipulation is it has to be somewhat sort of kind of approved and paid attention to by the FDA first.
Let me tell you something. I used to work in the pharmaceutical industry, and the FDA is such a friggin' joke as far as it comes. I mean, I am telling you, there are so many things wrong with the FDA. It is not even funny. Something I read, it was a year or two ago now, the FDA they have the power in this country, the land of the free, right, to walk into a cheese owner shop that does artisanal cheese aged on wood boards and been done for thousands of years. And this guy doesn't think it's safe all of a sudden. Practice has been going on and shuts down an industry. People's lives affected. That almost happened. He did it.
You tried.
And people pushed back so much that the FDA wasn't able to do it. But that is a lot of power for one stupid little peon who thinks he knows better than people who've been doing it for forever.
Power to the people.
I mean, it's
right
ridiculous.
That meme is
Fist in the air.
It's the guy in the hard hat. He says, I don't know how to do your job, but my government checklist says you're doing it wrong.
Right, exactly.
I love that.
I mean, that's so true. And it's gotten to the point, I mean, it is absolutely ridiculous. One of the reasons people talk about drug companies all the time, and I'm not going to defend them, but I will say that there are extreme costs that go into complying with all of the FDA regulations.
It takes $1 billion to bring a drug to market.
Yes.
$1 billion.
$1 billion, and they have to recoup that. They are a business, people.
Look,
they have to recoup it somewhere.
We can't have snake oil salesmen just going out and selling their snake oil, okay? If it's going to have side effects that like cause death and hypertension and high cholesterol and the rotting off of an arm and dizziness and poops, I mean, we can't have that kind of stuff on the market.
You can have study without the government regulation that the trials.
They already have.
Wait, I think you meant the opposite.
They already have
Justin,
those side effects, don't they?
Exactly.
And we also have other review systems.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you don't. The FDA doesn't need to monopolize that particular service. I mean, you think about the electronics industry. You have Consumer Reports, and you have Amazon Review. Not that I particularly love Amazon Reviews, but you do have free market solutions to figure out whether products are good or not.
But Mike, who is better suited to figure out whether products are good or not than the people that end up as political appointees that probably didn't work in the industry prior?
Well,
that
Justin,
are now.
You have a fair point there.
I know, right? That's what I'm saying. Why should those people not be making the decisions? I mean, my God.
One of the someone I've heard speak on this issue who is actually a person in the know is Ms. I can't remember her name.
Mary Ruwart.
Right, and she was a research.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah, she happens to be a libertarian as well, but she was she's a doctor, correct?
She's running for office.
She's a doctor, yeah. She's a pharmacological researcher.
So when the AIDS epidemic was happening in the beginning, when it was like when they were starting to develop drugs, so not in the very beginning, but when they were starting to figure out what was going on and develop these experimental drugs, these cocktails that were actually helping people. They tried to get the government to let them give this to these people who were suffering tremendously. And dying everywhere. There are other issues surrounding that, but...
It's just Dallas Buyers Club.
I don't know, I've never seen that. But so the government would not allow them to give these drugs. So what people were doing is they were going on the black market buying the drugs, which because black markets are free markets, people can get what they need.
Right.
They were getting these drugs. So by the time the industry had passed all the tests, all the reviews that the FDA wanted them to do, they couldn't recoup their money at all because people already had what they needed. It was already becoming available to people. It's a big problem, and people shouldn't have to suffer like that. I mean, there's no guarantee that the drug will work, but if you're already dying and suffering, why wouldn't you have the right to try to find? We have a friend that died of cancer.
I mean, it seems to be better to risk your life taking a drug that might work than to just watch your life slip away taking drugs that you know won't.
Exactly.
I mean, that seems like simple logic.
Yeah, a friend that died, she had cancer. She did an experimental treatment that wasn't legal. Okay, it wasn't illegal, but the government hadn't approved it. So they had
approved it, but just for something else.
Oh, okay. So for something else. So anyway, she got this treatment from a man that had come in from Europe, I think it was. Got the treatment, went into remission for years. Got the cancer again eventually. That treatment, that guy had been completely shut down. She ended up dying. She couldn't get that treatment again. She couldn't try it again. It's something that had worked for her. So, I mean, we lost a friend who could have been saved. I don't know. But the point is she didn't get the chance to try. And now her children are without a mom. Like, it's sick.
Here's the thing, though, Sherry. If we give people the right to try, then they're not going to just trust the Medicare system and the government-run medical system. And if they don't trust the government-run medical system, they might revolt against it.
Might be dominoes.
That would be catastrophic for those that want to control 1/6 of the economy.
I think we think in this country about healthcare as something different than other products on the market, and it's really a product. And you are not someone isn't beholden to you to give them their service. Like there's all kind of things that go into this, but people, the person, the consumer, the patient should be the one leading that with medical professionals who understand these things.
If it affects me, I should be making the decision.
Yeah, not a government telling me you can't.
That sounds an awful lot like personal responsibility, and we all know what people do with personal responsibility. They screw it up, Sherry. The government's got to be there to make sure that they do the right thing.
Yeah,
I'll tell you one thing. The FDA runs like a well-oiled rock.
All right, on that note, we will be right back with Mr. Michael Boldin of the 10th Amendment Center. Don't go away. You will be right back.
Someone who completely give their heart to only me, and when I find that one, that's when I'll fall in love. Inside my soul, holding on and you won't let go.
7:19. Welcome back. You are listening to Speaking Freely on Knoxville Talk Radio 92.3 FM and AM 760, broadcasting from the FMT Insurance Studios, and always taking your calls on the Pure Magic Hotline at 865-888-TALK. That's 865-888-8255. And guys, I'm super excited. Yes, it is time.
Good.
Woo!
We have on the line with us Mr. Michael Boldin of the 10th Amendment Center. I'm going to bring him online now.
I'm a little starstruck.
Are you there, Michael?
I'm the one who's starstruck.
Oh, look at you with the sweet sentiment right off the bat.
He's a sweetheart.
I love people that butter us up as soon as I get on radio thinking we're somebody important.
You got the job.
Well,
I'm waiting for my check in the mail. That's it.
Well.
It sounds like we're having a little hard time here. Hearing on the, I don't know. Is your radio turned up? Okay, we figured it out. We had a little technical difficulty there, Mike. Sorry about that. But you also have the pleasure of being the person known as the first guest on the Tom Woods podcast.
I am number one.
Yes, you're number one.
That doesn't mean number one in this case. As you know, Sherry, is not necessarily a roll of honor, but I was number one as kind of a test run there. So,
well, I've heard many of your interviews on there, and they're always fascinating. I think you're doing great work out there. So, with that said, why don't you tell us a little bit about what the 10th Amendment Center does?
Okay, I founded the organization back in 2006 in the summer, so we're going on year 12, which is pretty amazing.
Wow.
In this realm through now our third administration in Washington, D.C. And my idea back then was I had done some activism individually for a number of years on various issues. And at that time, I just started seeing that everything that government promised, more so in Washington than even locally, every time I heard something from some politician or bureaucrat or pundit, it was either a lie or what they promised never actually came through or cost way more than what they claimed they were going to do. And I just started recognizing, most of the stuff that they should be doing or that they're doing, they shouldn't be doing in the first place, which led me, of course, to the Constitution and the 10th Amendment, which is a legal rule of construction that says if the power is not expressly delegated to the federal government in the Constitution, then they're supposed to leave that to the states or the people as the people of each state determine. So I just started out doing a little blog thinking, okay, I'm just going to point out problems in the Bush administration, which there were many. We can talk about things like Real ID, Patriot Act, foreign policy, things like that. There's a lot of bad stuff. And it just kind of seemed to catch on. And then I kept doing it while Obama was in office, and we're still doing it today. Basically, our role is to educate the general public, A, on the proper role of government under the Constitution, and B, how to actually put that into effect.
Cool.
So how do you do that? What's the primary weapon in your arsenal?
Well, we don't have to talk about weapons necessarily.
Well, no. Sorry, poor analogy. This is a peaceful revolution.
Well, certainly it is. So, first of all, education. We publish articles. We produce videos. We've done documentary-length films, basically educating people like, okay, this is what they're supposed to be doing. This is what they're not supposed to be doing, which is way more than what they do. So, first of all, that's the educational part. But then we also work on a legislative end on the state level to basically either reject, resist, or what Thomas Jefferson would call it, nullify those acts that the federal government does that are outside the scope of their constitutional role.
Right.
Glad you brought up Thomas Jefferson. Could you tell us a little bit about the principles of 98 and how they fit into all this?
Yeah, so this idea of nullification. So first of all, again, we're starting out with the idea that the Constitution is a document that has a limited set of delegated powers to the federal government. Now, documents don't enforce themselves. Words on paper can't actually tell the government. I mean, they're written down, they're a set of rules. If I ran a business and I wrote a bunch of rules down on paper, or now it's electronic these days, and people didn't follow those rules, I don't blame the rules that were written down. I blame the enforcement mechanism. And in that case, if I ran a business and I wasn't getting employees that followed my rules, I'm not enforcing it. So the idea that the Constitution is a set of rules for the federal government arranged by the people of the several states, so the people of each state have either approved or not. In this case, at this time, I would say the market has said people are still wanting to follow the Constitution. They want the government to do what it's supposed to do. So there is an enforcement problem. So people in the states can't rely on Washington, D.C. to fix problems created by Washington, D.C. We can look, for example, just this week, we've seen not only a reauthorization, but an expansion of mass warrantless surveillance. Just earlier today, the Senate gave it final approval, mass warrantless surveillance, which is totally unconstitutional. The founders called this general warrants. It's one of the reasons for the American Revolution in the first place. And now they're putting it into law. I expect the president to sign it. He's been actively supporting the legislation. So this tells us, for all these people, for all these years, who've been lobbying Congress to stop their buddies in another part of the federal government, to stop their federal spying programs, it is a failed strategy, and it's very dangerous to totally rely on them. And even Thomas Jefferson himself also said the same thing about federal courts. If you rely just on the federal courts to be the arbiter of what the federal power is, this is a dangerous doctrine indeed, is what Jefferson called it. So we need to look to the states and individuals to reject unconstitutional federal acts.
Right. I couldn't agree more.
Right. Yeah, Jefferson.
That's the short version.
That's a great version.
Yeah, Jefferson actually repealed the tax, whiskey tax that George Washington implemented that caused the Whiskey Rebellion under Alexander Hamilton's advice, right?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on the Whiskey Rebellion. We have an article on our site from a guy named Steve Palmer that gives some really interesting history to that. But in general, now you can look at what the federal government did back then. And if you're talking about things like Jefferson opposing the whiskey, the tax, or the Alien and Sedition Acts, which is, if we're getting back to the principles of 98, Jefferson and Madison in secret authorized these. Or they authored these documents known as the Kentucky and Virginia Resolutions of 1798. This is where the term Principles of 98 you mentioned comes from. And there they both gave us the same general principle that when the federal government exceeds the powers delegated to it, the states not only have a role but a duty to reject those federal acts.
Man.
Jefferson said a nullification of the act is the rightful remedy, not just a good idea, but the way to deal with it. And Madison said when the federal government exercises powers that he called dangerous, a palpable exercise, dangerous powers, he said that the states were duty-bound to interpose. Not not just a good idea, but it's a duty of the state to do something. And we actually have been working in recent years to have states exercise that duty and do something about unconstitutional federal acts. And I'd say it's actually happening in larger numbers than any time in history.
That's awesome. There's so much to look forward to, and when you look into this stuff, is that people are actually trying to find freedom in other, the avenue just to kind of end run around the government when they get in the way. I mean, it finds its own way to get to the, most free solution usually, hopefully, unless the government really comes down on something like that. But I wanted you to just like, we've talked about jury nullification on this show many times, but we haven't really delved into this kind of, I guess, state nullification, as you would call it. So, in one way, it is similar to jury nullification, correct? That in that you just ignore a law practically when it's ignorable. But in the other way, it is you trying to work within the legislation to change the law.
Well, it's kind of a for if you're talking about nullification, you're basically talking about making a federal act, whether it's a law, rule, regulation, executive order, whatever it may be, a federal act or program, you want it to not have effect.
Right.
Whether that means that it's been overturned in law and the feds just stop enforcing it, or so many people defy it or take action strategically to give it no practical effect. The end result is what we're talking about here. So we would define nullification as any act or set of acts that results in a federal act being rendered null and void in practice.
Like cannabis, that's happening right now in this country. That people, most people agree now that it's not dangerous. Like, it's less dangerous than alcohol. So people are just ignoring those laws, and then states are reasserting their laws. Yeah. So I think we can see it in that today, that people are actually just saying, this is ridiculous, and I'm not gonna do it. I'm just not gonna be beholden to that. But unfortunately, it's still
certainly. And I'm here in California, which launched this whole marijuana movement back in the mid '90s. In 1996, the voters here passed Proposition 215, which authorized the limited use of cannabis for medicinal purposes, even though and I was here at that time, I moved to California in 95, the year before, from Wisconsin, and even though 3 different presidents, 1 current and 2 former, came to California to lobby against it, claiming that supposedly the people here couldn't do this because, of course, the argument was always the supremacy clause. Federal law was on the books, and the people of California were going to pass something that defied federal law. They were warned they couldn't do this. They did it anyway.
It's so backwards.
And it went to the...
It's so backwards from how the thing was even set up to begin with.
People were supposed to be running this.
Yeah, states were supposed to retain those those rights over themselves. But
the individual sovereignty of the state is supposed to be exclusive from the federal government except for the enumerated powers.
Right. So, well, we have a break coming up here, Michael. So if you will just hang on the line just a couple more minutes, and we will be right back.
The Pure Magic Hotline is open for you to speak freely. 865-888-TALK. Talk Radio 92.3 and AM 760.
She can do no wrong. Turn us back on his best friend.
7:34. Welcome back. You're listening to Speaking Freely on Knoxville Talk Radio 92.3 FM and AM 760. Talk you can trust. Broadcasting on the FMT Insurance Studios, and always taking your calls on the Pure Magic Hotline at 865-888-TALK. That's 865-888-8255. And we have on the line with us Mr. Michael Boldin from the 10th Amendment Center.
Daniel's throwing hat tips, too, with the intro music. But I'm sure Josh and Alex have no idea that that's the case.
Justin just gave up our joke.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, are you there, Michael?
Somebody's got to get it.
I sure am.
Oh, good. Okay. I was like, I thought I might have hung up on you. I'm not the world's greatest at working this phone system.
Yeah, because you've messed it up zero
got
times
more than 2
so
buttons.
far. Good job,
got
Sherry.
3 buttons, actually.
Yeah, right.
3 whole buttons, but they're red and shiny, so that's good. Anyway.
I've been hung up on before. It's okay.
Probably by a woman.
I was going to say by better people than me, I'm sure. But we have a lot of questions. This is going to be a really great interview, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on with us. I'm sure we could spend a lot more time than we actually have talking about a lot of these things. But I guess one of the questions we have is, how do you actually work with the legislatures? What is that process that how do you bring all that together and make a start?
You want me to be totally honest?
Sure, yeah, of course.
Well, most politicians are really evil monsters.
I like
most of them.
Wait a minute, I'm
there
shocked.
are very, very few that are actually good people.
Is that the truth, or are they just actually incompetent and pretend that they aren't, which is the same thing as
I think a
evil?
lot of people would like you to believe that a lot of politicians are stupid and they're just bumbling fools. I mean, we heard this a lot about Bush back in the day. Oh, he was just a moron.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of them are sociopaths, and they're really good at what they do, and sometimes they like playing dumb, so you think that. But I think most of them are very dangerous. They're willing to exercise power over you in many ways that they shouldn't be doing, as long as they can get away with it. But on the other hand, so you've got one set of politicians that are just really evil, nasty, awful people that want to control everybody. And then you've got other ones that just want to win a popularity contest. And those are the ones that are easiest to work with. I mean, the good guys, which are very rare, certainly they're good to work with. But a lot of times, establishment, leadership in state legislators, they don't like them. So anytime they file positive legislation, something that would advance liberty or reject a federal act, it gets pushed to the back or it never gets heard. But the kind of slime ball ones that just blow with the wind, when there's enough popular support, then oftentimes they'll do something that's good just because they want to be popular with their constituents. So the number one thing that we've recognized over the last decade or so is that, especially in state legislatures, sometimes it only takes like 15 people making a phone call, not sending an email, but making a phone call and saying, you know what, I'd like you to support, for example, I don't know, there's a bill there in Tennessee, Senate Bill 146 from May Beavers, and there's a companion in the House from, I think it's 1407. This would, in essence, make the state of Tennessee a gun rights sanctuary state by banning the use of Tennessee resources or manpower for the enforcement of any federal gun control measure. Now, I know there's an NRA-backed guy as president, but the federal acts of 1934, 1968, and 86 are still on the books. There's a lot of federal gun control on the books, and this would be an extremely positive bill to get passed. but it's got to get through some pretty serious establishment committee chairs. So that's going to be very difficult. But maybe 10 or 15 phone calls to that committee chair. I don't know who it is off the top of my head right now, but a call to those committee chairs might get the bill a hearing. Once you get a hearing, people show up. Then some of those politicians on those committees might want to prove that they're strong on the Second Amendment and vote yes. So these are the kind of steps it really takes to get these bills to move forward.
That's really great. It just goes to show we don't have to have hundreds and hundreds of people doing these things, that just the right people getting to, or people calling the right people can really make a big difference.
Michael, can you tell us? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and on the opposite end, if you were to have tens of thousands of people make phone calls in Washington, D.C., we can see this happen just, again, this week on surveillance, but in the past on bank bailouts. It doesn't matter who calls. These people don't care. They're going to do the wrong thing almost every single time.
Because
but you actually can. You can make a difference sometimes on a state or a local level, and that's the way the system was set up.
Yeah.
Could you tell us more about other nullification legislation that's happening in Tennessee, or that has?
Or elsewhere that Tennessee could emulate?
Well, Tennessee could take some really good steps forward. Again, the right to keep and bear arms. It's Senate Bill 146 and HB 1407. I know there's been some legislation in recent years to deal with civil asset forfeiture. There's a really nasty federal program that Jeff Sessions recently said he was going to ramp up called the Federal Equitable Sharing Program. And what that does is when states restrict civil asset forfeiture, which is basically charging your property with a crime, they take your property and you have to prove that it was innocent for you to get it back, basically backwards. They're stealing stuff from you.
I love that you mentioned that, because next week I am actually going to the Hill in Tennessee, in Nashville, to advocate for a civil asset forfeiture bill that's basically one line that ends equitable sharing.
Right. And
there's a bill in Tennessee. I'm not sure if it only does that. It's HB 421 that also addresses the federal program. But if it was just one line saying, hey, we're not going to participate, we're going to opt. Is that the same bill?
I don't think it is, because we haven't actually got ours sponsored yet. So I'm imagining that what you're talking about is a more comprehensive bill. I know that one of our state reps brought a bill last year. I don't know. It might be the same one you're talking about, but it got gutted. It had a whole bunch of different provisions in it, and it got gutted, and they passed like two tiny provisions that had no actual effect on civil asset forfeiture. So
what they need to do is basically what you're saying: opt out of the federal equitable sharing program, because the federal government has been pushing local law enforcement to become a nationalized police force. One of the number one ways they do this is through this asset forfeiture program, where they're sending them all kinds of cash and hardware and goodies. And states can easily opt out. The first state in modern times to pull out of that program was New Mexico. There's also Nebraska, Colorado, and of all places, one of the best in the country these days is California. So if California can do it, Tennessee should be ashamed for not taking it.
I mean, even Florida is better than Tennessee on civil asset forfeiture, which is a freaking
and Florida's
joke.
Awful.
Florida's not good, but they're still better than Tennessee.
And it's interesting, because that issue is one of our kind of pet issues here at the show. And tomorrow we're having,
obviously, since I'm working on that bill.
Yeah, and tomorrow we're actually having a show on civil asset forfeiture that got canceled earlier this week because of the snowpocalypse we were having here, 2 inches of snow. So just so you know, we've struggled this week, Michael. We have really struggled.
Mightily.
Well, I was complaining that it was 74 out today.
It was 9 degrees here this morning. You don't know. You don't know how we've suffered.
Is everything still on fire around you, though?
No, I haven't seen any fire. There's so much concrete in my neighborhood. But asset forfeiture is a huge one, and asset forfeiture, the right to keep and bear arms. I think Tennessee should start growing hemp. Industrial hemp, which is used for food, for clothing, for oil. You can power cars off of this. You can make paper. It's a really important product. A lot of people talk about the trade imbalance with China. Well, this is an interesting thing that I've talked about for a while now. the United States is the world's #1 importer of raw industrial hemp. I'm not talking about something that's going to get you high, but just a product that you can make other products out, food and paper and clothes. The #1 exporter in the world is China. So how do you deal with that? Start growing hemp all over the country. They call it weed for a reason. It's really easy to grow, and farmers can make a ton of money on this stuff here in the United States.
That's another one of those things that a few states have gone ahead and legalized in front of the federal government, though, too.
Vermont, I think, is
Didn't
one
we
of
do
them.
that? Didn't Tennessee do that already?
Vermont was one of the first ones. And in fact, in 2013, when they passed that, the governor issued a signing statement warning that that it was still going to be illegal under federal law, even though Vermont had legalized it. And a number of people just started growing it anyways. They say, hey, it's your risk if you want to do it. And that's really what it gets down to. When you get states out of the way, when states stop helping the federal government enforce their unconstitutional acts, people will be more willing to take the kind of risk that they should be taking, which is to defy them.
Okay, that's great. On that note, we're going to have to take another break, and we will be right back in just a couple minutes. Don't go anywhere.
Stay with us.
This is Speaking Freely on Talk Radio 92.3 and AM 760. The Pure Magic Hotline is open at 865-888-TALK.
7:48. Welcome back, Knoxville. You're listening to Speaking Freely on Knoxville Talk Radio 92.3 FM and AM 760. Broadcasting from the FMT Insurance Studios and always taking your calls at 865-888-TALK. It's 865-888-8255. And our segment, of course, is always sponsored by Recuro.org, which is a nonpartisan news and media website where you can have your voice heard and you can submit articles on Tennessee politics, national politics, international politics. So check them out, recuro.org. And with us again, we have Mr. Michael Boldin on the line from the 10th Amendment Center. Are you there?
I am.
Okay, good. I'm always worried I don't have him on. Okay, so before we left, we were talking a little bit about the civil asset forfeiture and things of that nature. And I just wanted to ask you, I know you've mentioned on other interviews that I've heard where you used to be a leftist, correct? And so, so you've come a long way. And then also, we have this sort of, especially here in the South where we are, this sort of mindset of obedience. Like, with, like, say, the police, I had this talk just today with someone that, well, the police are just doing their jobs with civil asset forfeiture. It's the law that's the problem. And, I was saying they still are moral agents, right? So when you know something's wrong, you're still wrong for enforcing something. So how did you come that far? And how do we get people, just really encourage them to come out of that mindset of obeying the wrong things?
Okay, keep in mind all my puns are intended, so I'm going to call that whole message is a cop-out.
Right. I love it.
Yep, exactly.
So, okay, but with all joking aside, unfortunately, most people have been educated in a government-run school or in a private school that is approved by government overlords. Mm-hmm. And most people have been taught this kind of stuff. You just obey it until the law is changed, and then it'll be different. But that's not how the founders, and you would think that from the right, from your traditional conservative viewpoint, that the founders would be a much better guide. And unfortunately, most people haven't been taught this. So when they hear it, they're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize this. I thought this was a tool of the left to disobey. Well, specifically, James Madison in Federalist number 46. And if it's going to be the father of the Constitution versus some modern political pundit, I'm going to go with Madison every time. In Federalist number 46, he specifically said there are 4 steps on how to deal with federal overreach. And one of those 4 steps was, quote, a refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union. This is for states and individuals. And I think if Madison said it, that should be a green light to do it all the time.
And we really have, I mean, we have this tradition of resistance in our country. That's how it was even founded, was these
I
men.
mean, Samuel Adams didn't say, hey,
Exactly.
just overturn that law. No, I mean, sure, they try to overturn the law because when it's right to overturn it, you work to do that. But when you're up against a brick wall and they're refusing to do what's right for decade after decade, you can't just continue doing that.
That's why jury nullification has been a staple in society up until the last, 30, 40 years when they started changing the instructions to juries, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the people were supposed to be able to say, this law that this guy's being prosecuted under sucks, and we don't like it, and this guy shouldn't serve time for it because I wouldn't want to serve time for it myself.
Yeah, and the jury nullification really is the last line of defense. A state and individual or county or local level nullification is kind of a combination of individuals, local communities, states, even businesses, all working together to do things that advance freedom despite federal prohibition, whether it's on guns or hemp or whatever. This is actually more effective in preventing people from getting into the place where jury nullification is needed in the first place. So I think it's all very important, but certainly people have to stop saying, I'm going to obey. I mean, no one should have been paying the Obamacare tax.
Right.
I mean, this is absurd. People shouldn't be waiting for permission to defend themselves and their family. The founders wouldn't have stood for this, and I'm encouraging people to do that today. We just need some backbone.
It's the action that we can take, and just this recognition that legality does not equal morality. Sometimes they line up, but most often they don't, and you still retain your rights regardless of whether they're written down, regardless of whether the state says you have them or not. So I think we have to really bring out this, like, as a radical, I'm willing to do that in some cases, but it just seems like people aren't willing to, they'll say Constitution all day, and then they don't really understand what that means.
Well, it's just unfortunate because they've all gone through the government schooling, which is why it's more and more important to reject things like Common Core and all kinds of government-run schooling. The more that the schooling system is centralized. I went to a Catholic school when I was a kid. I was taught that Catholicism was the savior to all my problems, whether one agrees with that or not. Certainly, if you go to a government school, you're going to be taught that government is the solution to all your problems.
Exactly.
I bet you're right-handed, aren't you?
No.
They beat it out of you.
They smack that left hand if you try to use it. That's what I hear. That's what my mom always told me. She's Catholic.
So it's something a little different topic, but since you're out there in California, we thought we'd ask you about it. One of our Facebook listeners, Jason, he wanted to know what you think about the secession movement going on in California.
The separation of the state into pieces, I think, more specifically, is what he was aiming for.
Oh, the 6 California. I don't think any of them are going to happen. I mean, it's interesting how when Obama was president, a lot of my neighbors didn't want to talk to me. But soon as Trump took office, I started getting calls from people saying, hey, Boldin, how are things going? I heard about that Cal exit thing. Are you all over that? I mean, constantly. So it's unfortunate that people in California are really excited about resisting Washington, D.C. when Trump or Bush is in charge, but they aren't when Obama's in charge. We need, and the opposite goes for the right, unfortunately. We need people to be consistent, keep their decisions local. What's right for Tennessee is not necessarily right for California and vice versa. Let's let everyone have their own way in their own area. That's the way the system is set up. And that's the only way that we can stay at peace with each other.
50 labs of experimentation. That's what the founders had in mind.
And culture has so much to do with that as well. We've talked about that before, that what's acceptable in the South is not necessarily going to work in California. We know this. I mean, it's pretty clear.
I'm a fish out of water when I'm in Tennessee. It's not. I mean, it's true. But that doesn't mean I don't love other people and live your life the way you want to live. I'll live my life the way I want to live, and let's not try to control people so far away and make them live our way.
We don't need a nanny.
That's exactly the problem. We try to put too many things on the federal government saying you have to live in this box, whereas you have all these other smaller boxes that you can certainly use. Decentralization is a huge thing with your group, right?
That is the number one
core,
thing.
Right?
We recognize all the political religious, economic, moral viewpoints are so different across this massive country. The only way people can live together in peace is by allowing them to have their own style of life in their own area. Again, 50 labs. South Carolina is different than Washington State. Let them be that way.
One more quick question as somebody that's probably more learned on these topics than I am. And we are short on time, so do make it brief if you don't mind. And I know this is horrible. But rumor has
What's the meaning of life?
Right. The rumor has it the county sheriff is the ultimate on jurisdiction within any county. How much truth is there to that?
Wow, there's no way to get
right. Well, I mean,
it's a tough one. A lot of them get asset forfeiture funds, so it becomes very difficult. They love their federal partners.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Okay, so I'm sorry we don't.
I think the striking the root, we have to first kind of disengage from federal policy.
Yeah, right. That's great. I'm sorry we don't have more time for you to really get into that. We've got like a minute left, and I want people to be able to find you. And you are at the 10thamendmentcenter.com, correct?
Yeah, I'm actually going to recommend that people go to 10thamendmentcenter.com, all spelled out, /report. We have a 78-page report of all the things that are going on. We're barely scratching the surface here. All around the country, people can get ideas of how to put this stuff into practice.
Right. Well, we certainly do appreciate you coming on and spending some time with us. And like I said, you can go to 10thamendmentcenter.com/report and get that information. That'll be all for us tonight. It goes by quick when it's so much fun. So you guys have a great evening, and we will see you tomorrow. Same bat time and same bat channel.
Thank you so much.
Say we count stacks. Come on.